At 05517 exactly on the morning of March 4, 2026, somewhere high above the Persian Gulf, an Iranian radar operator leans forward so far in his chair that his nearly touches the glass of his display screen. One contact, a lone aircraft, flying slow, flying low, flying entire lone. No formation, no escort, no wingman anywhere on the scope. He cannot believe what he is seeing, and for 3 full seconds he simply stares, convincing himself that what the radar is showing him is real. It is real, and it will be the single most consequential mistake the Iranian Air Force makes in a generation. Iran has been on edge for weeks. The satellite images circulating through every intelligence agency, from Langley to Tel Aviv, do not lie, and they have not been lying for months. Freshly poured concrete over hardened underground bunkers. Excavated earth piled in massive berms around nuclear sites that were not supposed to exist in the configurations they now clearly occupy. Construction crews working around the clock at a pace that does not signal confidence. It signals panic. Washington sees it. London sees it. Tel Aviv has seen it for months and has been raising the alarm through every back channel available to a nation that understands existential threat in ways most governments never will. The entire world watches Iranian bulldozers work overtime, and the entire world understands exactly what it means. A regime burying its most valuable assets underground does not do so because it feels safe. It does so because it does not feel safe at all, and it knows exactly why. Scared regimes do not go quiet. History has proven this, without exception, across every decade of the modern era. Scared regimes lash out. They manufacture moments of aggression, calculated confrontations designed to remind the world that they still matter, that they still carry weight, that crossing them still carries consequences. They use these manufactured moments as internal propaganda, as deterrence theater, as proof to their own military that the government they serve is still strong enough to challenge the most powerful nation on earth. Tonight, Iran decides to manufacture one of those moments. Tonight, on March 4, 2026, Iran decides to remind the Persian Gulf, who it believes owns these waters, who has always owned these waters, and who will continue to own these waters regardless of what any American carrier strike group parked 200 miles offshore might have to say about it. That decision will cost them something far more valuable than aircraft. It will cost them credibility, deterrence, and the last shred of confidence their Air Force commanders carry into every operational briefing. Everything, in other words, except the jets themselves. Those, the Americans will let them keep because the lesson lands harder when the pilots can walk back into their commander's office and try to explain what happened to them. The radar return is textbook perfect. One aircraft, no formation, no escort, drifting closer to Iranian airspace than any American pilot should reasonably comfortable with. Slow and steady, like a pilot who made a wrong turn 20 minutes ago and still has not figured out the error. To the Iranian radar operator sitting in that darkened room on the morning of March 4th, this is not a warning sign. A warning sign would be a flight of 4 aircraft at high altitude with their radar emitters active and their intentions obvious. This is not that. This is a gift. A single, apparently confused American aircraft wandering into a position where it can be intercepted, humiliated, and sent home as a message to Washington about the cost of operating too close to Iranian sovereignty. He stares at the return for 3 full seconds. Then he picks up the phone. The conversation is short. The order is clear. Scramble. 2 Iranian F-14 Tomcats roll out of the alert hangar at Bandar Abbas at speed, canopies dropping and sealing, engines building from a low idle to full military power with a sound that shakes the concrete beneath the ground crews watching them go. Iran's Air Force has been nursing these airframes since 1979, the same year the Sony Walkman first appeared on store shelves in Japan. 47 years of smuggled components sourced through shadow networks spanning a dozen countries. 47 years of improvised repairs carried out by engineers working from memory, from photocopied manuals, from experience accumulated through necessity rather than formal training pipelines. 47 years of sheer national determination, keeping legendary American-designed jets operational inside a sanctioned nation that was never supposed to fly them this long. The fact that they still fly at all is a genuine engineering achievement, and the Iranian pilots who strap into them know it. They are proud of it. Tonight, 2 of those pilots believe they are about to add another chapter to that story. The F-14 Tomcat in its prime was one of the most feared interceptors ever built by human hands. Its long-range radar could track multiple targets simultaneously at distances that made other interceptor of its era look short-sighted. Its variable sweep wing geometry allowed it to be lethal at both low speeds during close-in maneuvering and at supersonic pursuit velocities where lesser aircraft ran out of energy and options. In American hands during the Cold War, operating from the decks of carrier strike groups in exactly the waters these 2 jets are now climbing away from, the Tomcat was the gold standard of naval aviation. Adversaries planned around it. Soviet naval aviation doctrine was shaped in direct response to what the Tomcat could do to their strike packages. It earned its reputation honestly and completely. Iran's version is a different aircraft in every way that matters operationally. Decades of isolation have extracted a measurable and compounding toll on every system these jets carry. Spare parts sourced through through intermediaries in Turkey, Malaysia, and Eastern Europe. Components of uncertain provenance installed by technicians doing their best with what they have. Avionics that were cutting edge when Jimmy Carter was still president, running on processing hardware that has not been meaningfully upgraded since the hostage crisis ended. The missiles these jets carry tonight have not seen factory-certified maintenance in decades. Whether the weapons loaded under their wings would actually guide, actually track, actually detonate on command rather than on their own schedule or not at all is a question Iranian engineers discuss quietly in private and carefully avoid answering out loud in any official capacity. The pilots climbing into the cockpits of these jets tonight do not spend time thinking about any of that. They think about the target, one aircraft, alone, already in a position they can exploit before it has any reasonable chance of responding. The two F-14s climb hard into the darkness over the Gulf, afterburners paint orange smears across the black sky before the pilots throttle back and begin their intercept geometry. In a briefing room in Virginia, in a compartmented space aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln, in the planning cells that have been working this specific scenario for 11 days, nobody is surprised. The aircraft that is about to be intercepted was never lost. It was placed. Every heading change, every altitude adjustment, every second of its apparent vulnerability over the past 40 minutes has been choreographed with the precision of a stage production written by people who understand Iranian radar doctrine, Iranian intercept procedures, and Iranian decision cycles at a level of detail that would be deeply uncomfortable for Tehran contemplate if they knew it existed. The bait was designed specifically for the operators who took it, shaped to fit the decision-making patterns of the radar controllers and air defense commanders, who were always going to be watching that sector on this particular night. The aircraft flying the bait profile is an EA-18G Growler, and what it is capable of is something the Iranian pilots closing on it from behind have no genuine operational understanding of. From the outside, the Growler is indistinguishable from a standard F-35 Super Hornet. Same airframe, same external profile, same general radar cross-section. Iran's radar operators looking at the scope cannot tell them apart, and that ambiguity was not an accident. It was engineered deliberately by the designers of the trap, because the trap only works if the target walks into it willingly. Inside the Growler's cockpit and rear station, a pilot and an electronic countermeasures officer have been monitoring the approaching F-14s with the calm, concentrated focus of surgeons preparing for a procedure they have rehearsed so many times the steps feel automatic. The electronic countermeasures officer watches the Iranian radar frequencies paint his aircraft on the threat display. He identifies each emission type, catalogs the pulse patterns, calculates the jamming solution that will be most efficient against each system. He does not touch his controls. Not yet. The discipline required to wait is part of the training. Let them commit. Let them establish lock. Let them reach the point where there is no ambiguity about intent, no diplomatic gray area that requires careful navigation afterward. Then act, and when you act, act completely. High above both aircraft, invisible against the starless sky over the Gulf, an F-35C holds its position with the engine management precision of a machine designed from its first blueprint to exist in spaces where other aircraft cannot. Its passive sensors, receiving everything and emitting nothing, have been tracking both F-14s since the moment their landing gear left the Iranian runway. Track files open and continuously updated, targeting data flowing through the aircraft's sensor fusion architecture with a fluency that makes the information feel less like data and more like total awareness of everything happening in the airspace below. The F-35 pilot watches the intercept geometry on his tactical display with the detached patience of someone who has read the last page of the book and is watching the earlier chapters play out. He does not touch his weapons. He will not need to, not tonight. He has known since the mission brief that tonight is not about weapons at all. Tonight is about something more enduring and more damaging to Iranian strategic confidence than any debris field in the Gulf could ever produce. The lead F-14 pilot pushes his throttles forward as the range to the target collapses through 10 miles, through 5, through 3. His radar scope shows a clean, fat, beautiful return. The target is not maneuvering. It is not accelerating. It is not taking any defensive action whatsoever, just sitting there in the sky, slow and steady, as though it's absolutely no awareness that two Iranian interceptors are closing on it from behind with weapons armed and geometry favorable. His weapons system officer calls out the lock confirmation from the rear cockpit in a voice tight with the kind of excitement builds over a career spent waiting for exactly this moment. Solid tone, clean geometry. The targeting system confirms the shot is available. The pilot arms his weapons with the practiced confidence of a man who has been preparing for this his entire career. His thumb moves to the trigger. He exhales slowly. He is about to demonstrate to the world what happens when American arrogance sends a lone aircraft and when aircraft into Iranian waters without sufficient protection. He squeezes the trigger. Not a misfire tone. Not a system warning light cycling amber. Not a caution message appearing in the lower corner of his display. Complete, total, absolute silence where a weapons release tone should exist. He blinks. He looks at his radar scope. The return that was sitting fat and clean and perfect on his display 1 second ago does not exist anymore. Not faded, not degraded, not tracking away. Gone. He switches radar modes. Nothing responds. He tries his backup ranging system. No response of any kind. He cross-checks his avionics display and sees a cascade of error messages appearing in a sequence that makes no rational sense, because these systems do not fail simultaneously under normal conditions. His weapons system officer is calling out instrument readings that contradict each other in ways suggesting the underlying data processing has simply ceased to function coherently. Navigation down. Communications degrading toward uselessness. The radar warning receiver flooding itself with undifferentiated noise it cannot categorize or process into coherent threat assessments. The cockpit that felt 30 seconds ago like the most powerful place in the Persian Gulf now feels like a broken elevator in free fall toward the black water below. He gets on the radio with a voice he cannot fully steady and tells ground control that his systems are failing across the board. Ground control tells him to troubleshoot. He tells ground control there is nothing left to troubleshoot because everything is simply gone. All of it. Simultaneously, ground control goes quiet in the way that people go quiet when they have no answer and understand that admitting it is now unavoidable. The wingman's aircraft dies 8 seconds later. Same result. Same silence. Same cascade of simultaneous system failures that Iranian maintenance crews will spend weeks attempting to explain and will ultimately be unable to reproduce in any controlled diagnostic environment, because what happened to both jets was not a mechanical or electrical malfunction in any conventional sense. It was a targeted electronic execution delivered by a system the Iranian pilots never detected, never saw on any threat display, and cannot describe coherently to the debrief officers waiting for them on the ground. The EA-18G Growler is built around a single core operational purpose. Purpose is finding the specific radio frequencies that an adversary's aircraft depends on for its most critical functions and destroying those frequencies with focused electromagnetic energy of sufficient power and precision to render every dependent system simultaneously and completely useless. Its jamming suite does not operate randomly. It is precise in the way a surgical instrument is precise, targeted at specific systems rather than the electromagnetic spectrum as a whole. It identifies the exact radar frequencies, communication bands, and weapons guidance signals being used by the target and overwhelms them with directed energy powerful enough to saturate and blind every receiver tuned to those frequencies. The moment the lead F-14's fire control radar established its lock and the Growler's threat display confirmed the emission signature, the electronic countermeasures officer had everything the system required: frequency, pulse repetition interval, emission pattern, power level. He activated the solution he had prepared and held ready since the intercept began. Invisible energy crossed 300 meters of open Gulf air in a fraction of a second that no human perception could track. The F-14 did not experience a mechanical failure or an electrical fault. It experienced a targeted, deliberate, precisely engineered electronic execution, delivered by a crew that had been preparing for exactly this engagement for 11 days and executed it with a professionalism that will never appear in any press release or be acknowledged in any official statement. 2 F-14 Tomcats, representing 47 years of Iranian national sacrifice and determination, reduced to expensive, barely guided metal tubes over the Persian Gulf in under 10 seconds. 0 missiles fired by either side. The entire engagement decided before either Iranian pilot had the cognitive bandwidth to understand what was happening to them, let alone respond to it in any meaningful operational way. The Growler crew notes the time, confirms both Iranian aircraft are fully neutralized. Then they turn for home with the unhurried confidence of people who finish their work cleanly and know it without needing confirmation from anyone. The Iranian pilots do what any rational aviator do when their aircraft transforms from an interceptor into a liability over open water in the dark. They turn back toward the coast. No weapons functional, no radar, no communications worth depending on, just 2 men flying crippled jets home on raw piloting skill accumulated over careers spent in these airframes, navigating by whatever backup instruments still function, and the instinct that builds in a pilot who has spent enough hours in one specific aircraft to feel its attitudes and tendencies through the seat of his flight suit. They believe, as they turn for the coast, that the worst part of the night is behind them. They are wrong in a way that will take them the rest of their careers to fully process. At 35,000 feet, the F-35C pilot has been watching all of this with the passive sensors of an aircraft that sees everything and reflects almost nothing. He decides that the Iranian pilots are wrong about the worst part being behind them, and he decides to correct that misunderstanding in person. The F-35C does not approach from a distance that provides warning. It does not announce its presence on any frequency. It does not paint the F-14 with radar or activate any emission that would register on even a functioning threat receiver. It simply appears, already there, already positioned on the lead F-14's right wing, steady and calm. Speed matched so exactly the crippled Iranian jet that it appears to have been flying formation with it for the past 20 minutes. minutes and simply forgot to announce itself through any normal channel of aviation protocol. The Iranian pilot looks out his right canopy and his stomach drops through the cockpit floor. He has never seen an F-35C this close. Almost no adversary pilot has, because the F-35C does not permit itself to be seen unless it makes a deliberate decision to be seen, and that decision belongs entirely to the American side on American terms at American timing. Its radar cross-section is a fraction of the aircraft it was designed to replace, and a vanishingly small fraction of the F-14 sitting beside it, a shape that should not be visible at this range, that should not have closed to this range without triggering any warning on any system, is sitting off his wingtip with the calm permanence of something that belongs there entirely. Tonight, on March 4, 2026, it chooses visibility deliberately, because the message being delivered requires a messenger the Iranian pilot can see with his own eyes and cannot explain away as a sensor artifact or an electronic ghost generated by failing equipment. The American pilot looks across the gap between the two aircraft in the darkness over the Gulf. No aggressive moves. No weapons bay opening slowly to make a point. No radio ultimatum or formal warning in the language of aerial confrontation. Just a pilot in a stealth aircraft that Iran's entire integrated air defense network failed to detect or track at any point during the engagement, sitting 3 meters off the wingtip of Iran's most capable interceptor, holding position with an effortlessness that communicates more clearly than any words could manage. 2 fingers raised, pointed at his own eyes behind the visor, then pointed directly at the Iranian pilot across the gap. I see you. I have always seen you. I was tracking you before you left the runway, and I will hold this position all the way back to the coast. Quiet dominance. Delivered at 600 miles per hour over open water in the early morning darkness of a gulf that has long claimed as its own. The most powerful statement available in the vocabulary of air power, delivered without a single weapon being employed. The Iranian pilot turns back toward the coast and tells himself the engagement is now over. He focuses on flying his crippled jet home without losing control of it. The F-35C gives him 30 seconds of that belief. Then it moves. Not away, not upward into the dark. Forward, across the nose of the F-14 in a pass close enough that the Iranian pilot can read stenciling on the fuselage in the ambient light. Then below the Iranian jet. Up the other side. Back into position off the right wing. Unhurried. Effortless. Every maneuver executed far below the performance limits of what the aircraft is actually capable of. The sequence repeats a second time, not because the first pass was ambiguous, but because absolute clarity is the entire point. Not aggressive in any way that provides justification for escalation. Not threatening in the formal legal sense of the word. Something more psychologically damaging than either of those categories. The measured, deliberate contempt of a superior system operated by a superior crew, demonstrating that superiority to an adversary who cannot respond, cannot evade, cannot anything except maintain straight and level flight and keep pointing his broken jet at the coast. Then the radio crackles inside the Iranian pilot's helmet. He assumes it is ground control, finally reaching him with instructions, or at least the comfort of a familiar voice. It is not ground control. It is the USS Abraham Lincoln, transmitting on an open international guard frequency that the Growler has left deliberately unjammed because this specific transmission was always the final element of the plan. Not a formal military communication, not a warning, music logins, danger zone, broadcast at full volume directly onto the emergency frequency inside his cockpit, filling his helmet completely, impossible to ignore, impossible to silence with any control available him in a jet that has lost most of its electronic functionality. He cannot respond meaningfully. He cannot change to a frequency that helps him. He cannot explain to ground control what is happening because ground control can hear it too and has absolutely nothing to offer. He flies the remaining 40 miles to the Iranian coastline with the Top Gun soundtrack providing the score for the most professionally humiliating flight of his career, with an American stealth aircraft holding formation on his wing, as though it belongs there and always has, while every radar operator and air defense controller in the relevant sector listens and understands exactly what it means. The F-35C holds position for 39 of those 40 miles. Then, with the Iranian coast close enough that the lights of Bandar Abbas are visible on the horizon, the American aircraft banks away smoothly and without ceremony, disappearing back into the darkness as completely as if it nevested outside the Iranian pilot's memory. The Iranian pilot lands. He sits in the cockpit for a long moment after the engines spin down, staring at the instrument panel in front of him with the particular stillness of a man assembling language for a conversation he does not know how to begin and suspects he will be having versions of for the rest of his career. The numbers define the outcome precisely. Iran scrambled 2 F-14 Tomcats, representing a combined operational value of roughly $40 million, maintained nearly 5 decades of extraordinary national effort under international sanctions. Both aircraft expended 0 munitions. Both lost full combat capability within 10 seconds of attempting a weapons lock against an aircraft that was waiting for exactly that attempt. The United States expended zero munitions, committed zero additional aircraft beyond those already on scheduled patrol, and achieved complete engagement dominance before the Iranian side finished the offensive action it initiated. The total American cost was fuel burn and flight hours for 3 aircraft already airborne. That is the arithmetic of effects-based electronic warfare at its highest operational level, and it is arithmetic that has no answer in the current Iranian order of battle. The doctrine underpinning what happened on March 4, 2026 is not about destruction. A destroyed aircraft is evidence. A destroyed aircraft generates footage, generates international incidents, generates escalatory pressure. The doctrine is about demonstration. When you can reach inside an adversary's most capable interceptor and extinguish every system, without firing a single round, without leaving debris, without providing the other side anything they can use as propaganda, you do not need to shoot the aircraft down. You send it home. You let the pilot walk into his commanding officer's office and try to explain what happened in language that can travel up the chain of command without destroying everyone whose name is attached to the scramble authorization. You let Iranian military leadership sit together and confront a reality they cannot publicly acknowledge and cannot operationally escape. Their best available interceptors are not actually interceptors when American electronic warfare assets are operating in the same airspace, and they will now have to assume that American electronic warfare assets are always operating in that airspace, whether they can detect them or not. That debrief happens in rooms the world never sees. Its conclusions are never published. Its effect on Iranian operational planning, on the confidence of air defense commanders, on the willingness of pilots to believe in the systems they depend on, is more lasting and more strategically significant than any kinetic outcome could produce. Debris can be mourned and weaponized into a narrative of resistance. What happened on March 4, 2026 provides no debris and no usable narrative. It provides only a question with no good answer. If this is what happens to our most capable interceptors in the first 10 seconds, what does the rest of any engagement look like? The broader lesson reaches far beyond the Persian Gulf and far beyond this specific engagement. Electronic warfare has lived in the operational shadow of kinetic combat for decades, undervalued in budget discussions, underrepresented in the narratives that shape how the public and policymakers understand modern air power. It does not photograph well. It does not generate the visible confirmation of force that audiences and governments respond to. But what happened over the Persian Gulf on the morning of 2026 makes one thing undeniable. The most powerful weapon in a modern air engagement is not the missile with the greatest range. It is not the jet with the highest performance numbers. It is the system that decides, on its own terms, when the other side gets to fight at all, whether their weapons function when they attempt to employ them, and whether the engagement they believed they were initiating is the engagement that is actually occurring. Iran entered the engagement on March 4, 2026, believing it held every meaningful advantage. Experienced crews, familiar airspace, home waters, proven airframe, favorable geometry, a target that appeared vulnerable and unaware. Everything a smaller air force can reasonably hope for when challenging the most powerful military aviation establishment in history. The Growler revealed in under 10 seconds that Iran was playing a game it did not understand, on a board it could not see, against opponents who had written the rules before the scramble order was transmitted. F-35C delivered the personal message that the Growler made possible, and the USS Abraham Lincoln signed it with a song that will play in the memory of 2 Iranian pilots for the rest of their lives. Every time they look at a radar scope, every time someone asks what it feels like to represent everything your Air Force can put in the sky and discover in 10 seconds over open water, that capability is entirely contextual. On the morning of March 4, 2026, over the Persian Gulf, that context was defined entirely by the United States of America. If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture of how electronic warfare reshapes modern air combat and why the engagements the news cycle ignores are always the ones that matter most, subscribe and share it. The dominance requires no announcement is the dominance that lasts.